A total of 118 cards exist in Clash Royale now. That's a lot! While some cards have been consistently great, others just suck. Today we're looking at the worst card for every rarity in Clash Royale. Let's start with a bang. Champions! And the worst champion of Clash Royale is none other than the Golden Knight. The Golden Knight is a card that is exciting to play, but it comes with a lot of frustration and inconsistency. As a champion, he should stand out as a game changer, but in the current meta, the Golden Knight struggles to compete with other champions like the Archer Queen and Goblin Stein. The Golden Knight costs 4 elixir and boasts a unique ability, the Dashing Dash, which allows him to charge between units and deal damage in quick succession. His stats are solid for a champion, with almost 1800 hit points and 178 damage per second at tournament standard. Although his dash ability makes him a versatile card for breaking through defenses, it's also one of his biggest flaws, leading to inconsistency and inefficiency. When the Golden Knight was released in 2021, players were thrilled by his high skill cap potential. His ability to chain through multiple units and reach the tower felt game-changing. Early metas saw him used in decks with Tornado to maximize his dashing potential, creating devastating combos that could quickly turn the tide of a match. But it didn't take long for his weaknesses to become apparent. While his dash could occasionally pull off incredible plays, it was often unpredictable, targeting units you didn't intend or failing to hit the tower entirely. Outside of his dash, the Golden Knight's damage output is underwhelming. Therefore, he struggles to deal with high health units like Valkyrie or Mini P.E.K.K.A, and his damage per second is low in comparison to other champions. This limits his ability to trade effectively or create meaningful pressure. The Golden Knight is easily countered by most troops. Cards like Electro Wizard can interrupt his dash and make him ineffective. Additionally, swarm cards like Skeleton Army or Bats can overwhelm him if his dash ability is on cooldown. But the biggest issue with the Golden Knight is the competition. The Archer Queen provides consistent ranged damage and dominates most matchups, while the Goblin Stein just obliterates any push in existence all by itself. Additionally, his inability to deal with tanks or dominate matchups limits his versatility. Therefore, in comparison, the Golden Knight feels like a gimmick. Fun to use, but not reliable enough for competitive play. The Golden Knight has received several balance changes since his release, but they've often hurt more than helped. These changes, while aimed at balancing his power level, have left him feeling underwhelming compared to other champions. The Golden Knight faces a long list of counters in the current meta. Mini tanks like Knight or Valkyrie can easily counter him, and even swarms like Guards are a good choice. The Golden Knight is a flashy card with a lot of potential, but his inconsistent mechanics, low damage, and vulnerability to counters make him the weakest champion in Clash Royale. Moving on to the common rarity. For the worst common card in Clash Royale, we have the Minion Horde. What do I even say about this card? Remember the time it used to be feared in Clash Royale? Good old days. But over time, this iconic card has fallen from grace. It's now one of the least used cards in the game. Why? Let's break it down. The Minion Horde boasts incredible damage per second for just 5 elixir. When left unchecked, these 6 minions can destroy tanks, towers, and virtually anything in their path. Sounds great, right? But this is only a single part of the story. The Minion Horde has one major weakness: its health. Each minion has just 230 hit points at tournament standard. Therefore, it means a single arrows or fireball wipes them out instantly. With so many low-cost spells and splash damage options in the game, they are an extremely unreliable card to have in your deck. Back in the early days of Clash Royale, Minion Horde thrived because fewer players were using arrows and there weren't many splash damage cards in the game. But as Clash Royale evolved, so did the cards. Therefore, cheap spells became a must-have in every deck. And cards like Electro Wizard, Baby Dragon, and Magic Archer became more popular, making it easier than ever to deal with a Minion Horde. Almost every splash damage card or spell in the game can deal with them efficiently. But let's not also forget about the strategic disadvantage. At 5 elixir, the Minion Horde is a significant commitment. Therefore, if your opponent counters it for 2 or 3 elixir, you've just handed them a major positive elixir trade. That trade-off makes it incredibly risky to play in most situations. But why does this all make the Minion Horde bad? The answer lies in its reliability. When you play a Minion Horde, you're gambling. If your opponent doesn't have a counter in hand, you might get incredible value, but if they do, you've just wasted 5 elixir for nothing. In a game like Clash Royale, where consistency is key, that level of unpredictability is a death sentence for any card. It's why cards like Firecracker and Skeletons remain popular. They offer consistent value in nearly every matchup. Minion Horde, on the other hand, is a high-risk, high-reward card in a game where the risk often outweighs the reward. The Minion Horde hasn't seen many balance changes over the years, and that's part of the problem. While other cards have been buffed or reworked to fit the current meta, the Minion Horde has remained largely untouched. Cards like Minions or even Bats provide similar utility for far less elixir, and decks that rely on aerial swarms usually prefer the cheaper and more flexible options. But does that mean the Minion Horde will never find its place in the meta? I hope the Minion Horde gets some love soon. And by the way, if you guys want to show some love, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. It shouldn't come as a surprise to anybody when I say that the worst rare card in Clash Royale is the Three Musketeers. A card that once ruled Clash Royale as a cornerstone of heavy beatdown decks now finds itself rarely used. With a hefty elixir cost of 9, the Three Musketeers promise immense value on paper, but in practice, they've become one of the riskiest and least popular cards in the game. The Three Musketeers deploy 3 high damage dealing musketeers for a whopping 9 elixir. Individually, each musketeer deals 218 damage per second and boasts 720 hit points at tournament standard. Together, their combined power can obliterate tanks, shred air units, and destroy towers if left unchecked. But here's the catch: they cost almost your entire elixir bar. When you invest 9 elixir into a single card, you're taking a massive risk. Therefore, if your opponent counters them efficiently, you'll be left with little elixir to defend or build a counter push, and that's precisely where the problems began. The primary issue with the Three Musketeers is their elixir cost. At 9 elixir, they're the most expensive card in the game. This makes them extremely vulnerable to spells and splash damage troops. A single fireball, costing just 4 elixir, can severely damage all 3 musketeers, leaving them weak and easy to clean up. Even worse, decks today are loaded with spell combinations like Fireball plus Log or Poison plus Log, which completely shut down the musketeers. This high cost also makes it difficult to cycle back to the 3 musketeers if you need them again, making it unable for you to use the card frequently. Back in the early days of Clash Royale, 3 Musketeers thrived in slower, beatdown-oriented metas. Decks like 3 Musketeers Heal or 3 Musketeers Battle Ram dominated ladder and competitive play. Splitting the Musketeers into 2 lanes allowed players to create unstoppable dual lane pressure, forcing opponents to split their defenses. But the game has changed. The meta is now faster, and therefore cheap cycle decks and splash decks dominate the scene. Cards like Archer Queen, Golden Knight, and Royal Delivery have made it even harder for the 3 Musketeers to survive. The 3 Musketeers have seen a roller coaster of balance changes. They've received nerfs to their deploy time and other indirect hits through spell buffs, which have made them even harder to play. The list of counters for the 3 Musketeers is extensive. Spells like Fireball, Poison, and Lightning all deal massive damage to the 3 Musketeers, making them easy to eliminate for a positive elixir trade. Troops like Valkyrie, Executioner, and Baby Dragon can also handle them with ease, especially when paired with Tornado. Even split lane pushes, one of the Musketeers' key strategies, have become less effective. A good Clash Royale card provides consistent value in most matchups, but the 3 Musketeers, on the other hand, are highly matchup dependent. Therefore, if your opponent has the right counters, you're almost guaranteed to lose. Furthermore, their high elixir cost makes them a massive risk. Even if you manage to get value out of them, the elixir commitment often leaves you vulnerable to counter pushes, especially against fast cycle decks or beatdown strategies. Therefore, the big question is, can the 3 Musketeers be saved? One possible solution would be to reduce their elixir cost to 8. Do you think it's a good idea though? Discuss in the comments. Alternatively, giving them a slight health buff could make them less vulnerable to spells, but until then, the 3 Musketeers will remain a card that's too risky for most players to use. For now, the trio's greatest battle is against irrelevance. Taking the spot as the worst epic card in Clash Royale, we have the Witch. With her mesmerizing pink eyes and an army of skeletons, the Witch was once a staple in many Clash Royale decks, especially for new players. Her ability to spawn skeletons while dealing splash damage made her a strong card for both offense and defense. But in today's meta, the Witch struggles to find a place, often overshadowed by more versatile and efficient options. The Witch costs 5 elixir, deals splash damage to both ground and air units, and spawns 4 skeletons every 7 seconds. At tournament standard, her splash attack deals 134 damage per second, and each of her skeletons adds 81 damage when left untouched. At first glance, she seems versatile. She can counter swarms with her splash damage, support pushes with her skeletons, and even defend against certain win conditions. But in practice, her effectiveness is limited by her weaknesses, and those weaknesses have only grown over time. When the Witch first entered the game, she was a nightmare for unprepared players. Her constant skeleton spawns provided endless distractions, making her a solid choice against tanks like Giant or P.E.K.K.A. Meanwhile, her splash damage kept swarms like Minions, Skeleton Army, and Goblin Gang in check. New players especially loved her. She was easy to use, forgiving, and often won games in lower arenas where opponents didn't have the right counters. But as the meta evolved, Witch's shortcomings became glaringly obvious, especially at higher levels of play. The biggest reason the Witch struggles today is her vulnerability to splash damage, counters, and spells. Therefore, cards like Baby Dragon, Executioner, Valkyrie, and Fireball can easily neutralize her, while often gaining a positive elixir trade. For example, a 4 elixir Fireball can severely damage or outright kill the Witch, while also taking out her skeletons, leaving her ineffective for her 5 elixir cost. Additionally, Witch is slow. Her movement speed and spawn intervals make her easy to predict, allowing opponents to set up counters before she reaches the bridge. In a fast-paced meta dominated by cycle decks and quick counters, her slow nature is a liability. But the Witch's fall isn't just due to meta shifts. Balance changes have also played a role. The Witch has a reputation for being an unbalanced card. Why? Because it has received 19 balance changes so far, the most out of any card in Clash Royale. While some of these changes were later reverted, the damage was already done. Therefore, players moved on to other options and the Witch never fully recovered. But the worst part, countering the Witch often results in a positive elixir trade for the opponent. Therefore, for 5 elixir, she rarely provides enough value to justify her cost. But what truly makes the Witch one of the worst cards today? The answer lies in her inconsistency. In lower arenas, where players may lack the proper counters, the Witch can feel really strong, but at higher levels of play, her vulnerabilities are too easily exploited. The Witch tries to do too much: splash damage, skeleton spawning, and supporting pushes, but she doesn't excel at any of these roles. Other cards like the Executioner or even the Night Witch fulfill similar roles with greater efficiency. Her reliance on skeleton spawns also make her overly dependent on synergy with specific cards like Graveyard or Giant. Therefore, outside of these decks, she struggles to find a niche. Can the Witch ever become viable again? Only time will tell, but as it stands, the Witch is stuck in a middle ground. Too weak for competitive play, but still frustrating for newer players. How would you buff the Witch? A lot of you would have seen this coming, but the worst legendary card in the game has to be the Goblin Machine. The card that had everyone on their toes on launch now has a 0% rate. The reason? Heavy nerfs to the card, which totally killed it. Released in June last year, the Goblin Machine was perhaps the most broken card ever released in Clash Royale. Upon launch, the Goblin Machine was extremely overpowered, as its rockets used to deal damage like an actual rocket spell. Therefore, after terrifying the Clash Royale community for 2 weeks, Supercell had to drop heavy nerfs to the card. It was nerfed so brutally that the card was nowhere to be seen after the changes. Despite its high elixir cost, the card fails to provide any value. It's incredibly easy to counter on offense and doesn't serve much purpose on defense too. The Goblin Machine is set to receive some new balance changes, but will it be enough to save this card? While these cards may be indeed bad, it's the skill of the player which really makes a card useful. But unfortunately, most of us are bad at the game. If you want to find out whether you are also one of the bad players at Clash Royale, click on this video.